Welcome to the Obesity Medicine Podcast with your host, Dr. Matea Rentia, board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine. Here, we talk about a path to metabolic health, and we have real conversations about chronic weight management and living a full life. Just a reminder, I am a physician, but I'm not your physician. So everything that's on this podcast is for informational purposes, but please go talk to your doctor about what's right for you. There is no medical advice being given on this podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Friends, I am super excited today. We have Dr. Ida Salusky on today. She is going to talk about executive function. We're going to get into so many things today that hold people back with their health because you can know all the information, but if you don't actually understand why your brain might be working in a certain way, you really can't get very far. Can we start out today with you introducing yourself and just tell people everything that you do? Because you just have such an impressive resume. Is that the right word to say? But just what you've accomplished and what you do.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Ida Salusky. I am a clinical psychologist. I have a PhD in clinical community psychology. I am an associate professor at Northwestern University in the School of Medicine, and I also am the founder and principal of a clinical practice, Dr. Salusky Clinical Psychology and Consulting.
I love it. We were talking before this because I knew at one point, okay, I want to bring you on, and we were trying to hone in on what we wanted to talk about because there's actually a lot of areas that you are really specialized in. And we decided to talk about executive function. And so I'm wondering if we can just start out with just even explaining what does that mean in general terms?
Sure. Yeah. So executive functioning, it's a broad term and it refers to a few different things. It refers to planning and organization. So think about being able to juggle multiple tasks, prioritization, your ability to focus your attention. That's a part of your executive functioning. Being able to what's called task shift, or think about switching your gears. Your working memory is a part of your executive functioning. And so when we talk about executive functioning, the brain's a network, but executive functioning is most frequently associated with the prefrontal cortex, which when you think about what's behind your forehead, that's the prefrontal cortex. And it's like your administrative assistant of your brain. It's what helps you map out and get through the world, right? In practical terms.
I mean, basically what you were explaining here, you're talking about planning, organization, task shifting, working memory. I mean, that's basically everything.
It is everything. And it's a part of emotional, right? Emotional control too, right?
Yes.
It's a lot of things. Yes.
How would someone know if they're struggling with, I mean, I know there's a lot of different categories that we said here, but what's the difference between, oh, shoot, I forgot that, or oh, I'm having a day where it's hard to focus versus this is actually a problem that they need help on?
So the clinical disorder that's most frequently associated with deficits or difficulty with executive functioning. And when I talk about deficits, we think about functioning as a spectrum. Everybody's somewhere on the spectrum, but people who are outside of kind of what we would think of as a typical range, that's when we talk about somebody potentially having a deficit or a clinical challenge. It's normal to be forgetful. It's normal to lose your focus. But if it's something that is impairing your ability to function in your day-to-day life, and if it's something that has been persistent from childhood, then we're starting to think about things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. And people who have ADHD, forgetfulness isn't just occasionally forgetting your car keys or occasionally forgetting to pay a bill. It's something that's persistent, it's ongoing, it's regular, and without specific interventions, it doesn't course correct by itself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for giving that lots of clarity on what specifically we're talking about. More than half my clinic has some form of attention deficit, and I find that it greatly affects health because those same activities with exercise or things like that, it comes in. I find that everybody knows what to do. It's not massively something new when we talk about exercise and different nutrition things, but that consistency I find is really hard for some people. So let's just give the example of exercise. Maybe 3 times a week, we want to start to bring in strength training and it just falls apart at some point.
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have for a person where that's occurring for them? The consistency part isn't there.
I think questions I would start to ask myself or ask somebody else if I was working with them, because it could be about actually the planning of, are you programming it? It could be when we think about deeper levels of organization, are you struggling to plan your days in such a way that you're loading too much in and that's what's getting in the way? You think that you can fit it into this 45-minute window when you have something bookend on either end, and that's just not realistic. So it's the thing
Right.
that always falls off. The prioritization piece, is it that you're pushing the exercise until the end of the day? Like, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll get to it. And then you're exhausted, so you can't do it. I always like to start, and I would encourage people to think about what specifically are you doing in terms of thinking and mapping out when the exercise is going to happen to try and understand what the barrier is. And if it is really an issue of kind of organization or planning versus motivation, which is something else. And the way you would address motivation would be a little bit different than the way you would address an issue with executive functioning and doing something like getting into an exercise routine.
So you talked about you have to think about what you're thinking, you map it out, you're trying to find the barriers. When you're working with people, do you do one thing at a time? Okay, this week we're going to do this thing, or is it more broad? How do you start to work on these things?
So I wouldn't encourage anyone to be like, I'm going to work on this week and this next week. There's clear science around how change happens and how
Yeah.
long it takes to develop new habits. And it
Yeah.
takes more than a month to develop a new habit. So if I'm working with someone and they have a specific behavior that they're trying to change, we're going to be working on that for multiple weeks, probably for a month and a half, 2 months, until we see sufficient change to maybe move on to another behavior change. And again, the behaviors or whatever the goal is for change, it's small, it's incremental, and it's specific, because you're not going to radically change your life overnight. You're not going to
I think
radically
people
change your
think that.
diet.
I think
Yeah.
they think that they're going to do that though. And so I'm loving what you're saying because I'm like, yeah, we don't, you could a whole year work on increasing fiber, right? People think next week they're going to see me and it's solved. And it
No.
takes time,
Yeah.
right?
So as a concrete example, if you're getting in, I don't know, 3,000 steps a day, and so you want more movement in your life in general, that's your goal, then we're going to start with, can you get up to 4,000 steps a day, 3 days for the next week?
Yeah.
Very small, very achievable, because when people see success, they're motivated to move forward. When people experience, I don't want to say, people think of it as failure, but when people don't achieve goals that they set out for themselves, that can be demoralizing, right? And that can get into a cycle of self-defeating thoughts and negative thinking. And I didn't do it. I feel I have a negative emotions about I didn't do what I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
So now the coping mechanism or the protective mechanism is, I'm not going to try, so I won't fail.
Yes. Oh, that whole cycle, everyone listening can relate, right? Where you haven't achieved it and then you're just down in the pits because of it. But I like what you're saying, how you need to see success. You need to be able to show yourself evidence that it can work. How long do you think it takes to develop that habit that for it to actually stick around?
Depending on the habit, I would say a couple of months at a minimum.
Yeah.
And I always say, even if you can, like, certainly you could develop a habit in 30 days. Like, it's possible. But I think it's also always good to give yourself latitude, because not everybody is the same. And what we know about research and the time it takes on average to do anything, right? That's an average. It's going to be different for some people can achieve things more quickly. Some people take longer.
Yeah.
So my approach is to always calibrate and set expectations that provide a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of cushion. So if people take a little bit longer, again, they don't feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to be successful. And that cycle
Yeah.
that comes into play.
Yeah. Where could people get started when let's say they're feeling overwhelmed with all the things they maybe need to do for their health? Where could be a place that they could start?
With something that they're excited about and they like and they want to do. Don't start with the thing that you're least that you're least enthusiastic about. So as a personal example, we haven't said this, but we work together clinically. You're my obesity medicine doctor. And when I started my journey many years ago, the place I started wasn't with diet and nutrition because that wasn't what was most accessible. What was most accessible actually was exercise because my body just craves a lot of movement. I worked into developing a routine where I exercise 4, 5, 6 days a week, but I started in the lockdown of the pandemic when I had just had a newborn with exercising 0 days a week, right?
Yes.
So that was a long journey, but I started there because it was the thing that felt most accessible and that I was most excited about. And
I love that you gave this example because you are a ninja at exercise. Honestly, like when I think about the most consistent exercising person, I think about you. And so to think that you had built that, I mean, it doesn't even feel like that long ago, right? When we think about the years here.
yeah, and the other thing I would say with that is, and I had years before, I'd had a
Yeah.
routine and then life, kids, career, all of that. But when I started again, it wasn't like I went from 0 to 5. I went from 0 to 2 days a week, 30 minutes, from 2 days a week eventually to three. And literally over the period of probably 2 years, I got to the point where I was doing the 4, 5, 6. That's to say, again, you can develop a habit in 30 days. But the consistency and the ability to fit things into your routine or your life, whatever that looks like, that's going to look different from everybody. For me, it took longer and I was okay with that. But that's where I started and that's where I was able to be consistent over time because it's something that I like and I enjoy. And it's not just something that I know is important to do and is important for my health. It's something that I actually want to do.
I love this. You have to be excited about it. You actually have to want to do it. I love that because I thought you were going to be like, start with, I don't know, like decreasing the minimum, like the list of to-dos or something. This just sounds a lot more
I
realistic.
do all of that, yes. Like, especially my understanding of Europe is primarily women. So yes, reduce the things you have on your list, but start with something, the thing you pick to focus on, pick something you really enjoy, love, and that's the place to start, in my mind.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say someone, they pick something that they love, it's realistic, they're actually sticking with it. How do you know it's time to add something else or to be able to pivot in a way?
I would say a good litmus test is if you have had success over a period of, let's say, it could be a couple of months, it could be more,
Mhm.
and you internally feel like or think, I have a little bit more space. And when I say space, like cognitive energy, emotional energy, in addition to time
Mhm.
to work on something else, again, small.
Got it.
So maybe the small is and I'm laughing because this is something that I still struggle with because it's not something I enjoy. So it's not something I prioritize, but I'm going to do some meal prep for 1 hour once a week. That's the one thing you're going to add in, right? It's
Yeah.
small and it's specific and it's very time limited, but that's the moment when you would add that in. When one, you have observed and you have seen that you're consistent with whatever the previous behavior that you wanted to change
Mm.
you've been able to execute and change. And then two, when you think about your bandwidth and both emotional and time, you think like, yes, I have a little bit more time to dedicate to something else. And then what is that something else that you're next most excited about? Which for somebody it might be meal prep once a week for an hour.
I
Not
really
for
love this
me.
because I always see if someone's struggling, they want to do even more. Like they put
Yeah.
even more things that they're going to do and they get even more rigid. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we need more flexibility right now. I love that you're reinforcing all this. And gosh, one of the things that's so challenging about this topic is that it's so broad, right? And so are there any just in general things where you're like, when I do this with people, they really benefit from it? Any strategies or tips?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be different depending on the individual and their profile,
Yeah.
personality, all of that. But for some people, especially I work with a lot of women, I find that having people you're accountable to oftentimes helps my clients, right? I'll go back to the example of exercise. If somebody is waiting for you at 7 a.m. to go on that walk or jog, many people will be motivated to show up because they don't want to stand up their friend, they don't want to disappoint, or they don't want to not be a good accountability partner. So having support, right, which is basically what I'm describing, is critical, and that could look different ways. What we find clinically and in research also really helps people who are struggling with executive functioning is to develop systems, especially if part of the issue has to do with the forgetfulness, issues with working memory, establishing routines that are visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about timers, think about calendaring, and think about scheduling time to in a consistent way to calendar like every week. And to your earlier point, when you said taking things off of your plate, that's usually a big part of helping people who struggle with executive functioning be able to successfully follow through and integrate new behaviors. Because oftentimes people with attention deficit difficulties or difficulties with executive functioning, they struggle with time to think through and map out what can realistically be accomplished. And that's where you get into the situation or the scenario where there's too much packed into your day. It's not realistic. It's not feasible. Things are going to fall off your plate. And of course, the thing that's going to fall off the plate first is the behaviors or the habits that you haven't developed or that aren't critical to somebody else. So thinking about what you can take out and how you can have less, if you think about that calendar, less in your calendar.
Yeah. When I think about accountability, this is a massive one for me. So I basically always worked with a coach, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly. And I just had my session yesterday and I showed up and I was like, I'm so sorry, this is Groundhog Day. Like it's the exact same thing we talked about 2 weeks ago. There's something about it where if I wasn't meeting with her every 2 weeks, I would not continue to make progress because I would not have that moment of having to actually say I didn't do it. So
Yeah,
that
right.
accountability is so massive. And I have found in my health journey, I've had several groups of friends where they also care about their health. And that's been massive for me to be able to talk about it and not have to censor myself, that they care as much as me. I get ideas from them, they get ideas from me. But it's the fact that 7 years later, we're still talking, that accountability is huge to me because I don't ever forget why we're talking about things.
Right. And it sounds like there are people who are not judgmental, who have maybe not the same experience as you, but some
Yeah,
frame of reference, right? They're able to
definitely.
relate. So those are all kind of key components when we talk about what makes a good social support system.
Yeah, love that. And I like how you talked about with the kind of making it more visual. So using timers, using calendars. Are there any books or apps or things that you find are really great with helping with some of these things?
Yeah, so and I can send you a list, but there's a couple of kind of seminal books that have been written around cognitive behavioral therapy and ADHD management. And then there's kind of like the version for the clinician, and then there's like the workbook version for the client or the person that has ADHD. So I think those are really good, and I can give you names, and I know you
Yeah.
like things. And then if people are interested in more first person accounts, I can give some names of autobiographies of kind of famous people who have struggled with ADHD, amongst other things, and have written about how that's impacted their trajectories and how they learn to manage and function in the world in a way that is authentic to themselves, but also allows them to manage and work with their symptoms.
Yeah. Thank you. That would be great.
I would say the other component of functioning and deficits in executive functioning that's probably relevant
Mm,
is this idea of emotional control. There is a clear connection between executive functioning and emotional control and emotion regulation,
mm,
which you can articulate much better than I can the connection between food intake and emotion
Yeah.
regulation, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that's another piece that is really critical. And the other thing that I would say for just like general information, and I know that you work with a lot of middle-aged women.
Mhm.
So ADHD tends to be underdiagnosed in girls.
Mhm.
And certainly for the demographic you're working with at the time when people like me were kids, like,
Yeah.
because girls present more as inattentive than as hyperactive. And within schools, the kids that are going to get noticed are the kids who are disruptive, so the hyperactive kids. So a lot of women have not been diagnosed. I know in the email you sent, you use the term lazy. And that's like, I think
Mm.
that's really good
Mhm.
language, because that's language and verbiage that people are told and taught. You're being lazy.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I guess I would want to communicate to anybody that's listening to your podcast is there's a difference between, and I don't actually believe in general that people are lazy. People struggle with motivation, and that's a legitimate challenge. People struggle with executive functioning, and that's a legitimate challenge. But if you're being told or messaged, or you have the message, you're lazy and you're somebody who struggles to keep track of things or to show up on time. That's a huge way that ADHD presents in adults, is like you're late for every meeting, but you don't want to be late for every meeting. That should be a cue to you that maybe you want to go and talk or get a referral for an assessment. And the person who would do an assessment could be a psychiatrist, it could be a PhD level clinical psychologist. And what you probably want is what's called a neuropsychological assessment, which is like a comprehensive battery that's going to assess for like working memory, fluid intelligence, which is your ability to learn novel tasks, your verbal intelligence, your spatial awareness, processing speed. It's a comprehensive battery of tests. And as part of that, a diagnostician would be able to identify if you have ADHD, and if so, what type of ADHD you have. So 3 types of ADHD: predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, or combined type.
Mhm.
And depending on what type you have, the intervention strategies would look different. Somebody who's predominantly hyperactive is going to need somewhat different tools than somebody who's predominantly inattentive. Struggling to complete tasks, starting projects and then not finishing them, that's like another kind of hallmark symptom. Showing up late, being forgetful, that doesn't mean you're lazy. That doesn't mean you're not bright. It's a sign that something else is going on, and that you probably want, if you can, you probably want to get it assessed. And insurance should cover a neuropsychological assessment.
What is so common that I saw when I was in primary care is that the woman would have kids, the kids would get diagnosed, and they would realize in the assessments, oh my gosh, everything they're asking the kid is stuff I've struggled with. It's exactly what you're saying, that they literally couldn't identify. And I'll never forget when, because I actually had a lot of midlife women that would then get on treatment, and they would tell me, one was a real estate agent. And she said, I can't believe that this is how the rest of the world operates, because she just thought it was just her, how she was keeping track of clients and what was going on. And because the kid got diagnosed, she got diagnosed, and then her whole world could change. It's just incredible.
Yeah. And that is typical. So it's 50-50 chance that if you have ADHD, your child will. So the reverse
Yeah.
engineering, it's very true. And it is back to the lazy. People with ADHD who make it into adulthood without a diagnosis and are operating, doing their jobs, running their households, in many ways, they're functioning on a level that is so much more intense,
Yeah.
and more planful than people who don't have disruption or dysregulation with their executive functioning.
Is
Um,
anxiety high for them? Because I always found that they would think it was anxiety, like because they're trying to manage all these different things. I don't know if that's just
there's often misdiagnosis because women are overdiagnosed for anxiety disorders, but underdiagnosed for ADHD. So there's misdiagnosis, and there is some overlap in symptoms, but there's symptoms that are discrete between all of these disorders. There's also comorbidity with ADHD and or the depressive disorders. MD, major depressive disorder is the most common diagnosis. There is comorbidity, and then it's like a chicken or egg. Is it that you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety because you have undiagnosed ADHD and you're dealing with all of the challenges that come with that without the recognition that you actually have a health issue. Or it could be that these two things just happen in parallel, right? Because
Mhm.
life happens and that might trigger an anxiety disorder. But there is high comorbidity between the two, and there is misdiagnosis between the two, particularly anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, and ADHD for women. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that, yes, everything you're saying about the woman, the mother that's coming into primary care and the kid gets diagnosed and then she becomes aware. There are interventions, even in middle age. Medication management can be really helpful. I'll do some self-disclosure. I was 42 the first time I took, or 43 the first time I took a prescription med for ADHD. And it was transformative. Like all of a sudden, I didn't have to use a Pomodoro timer for every 10 minutes to make sure I was staying on task, which is what I had done
Yeah.
throughout my entire professional adult life as a professor. But there are also kind of behavioral strategies and techniques that can be done. What I will say is that if you are somebody who has made it into adulthood and is functioning in your job, is running your household, and you get diagnosed and you're like, I need an additional layer of support
Mhm.
because you've probably been hyper functioning and you've just independently developed a lot of behavioral strategies, medication management. And I'm saying this as somebody who I'm not a prescriber, I do the behavioral side, but
Yeah.
medication management might be the biggest bang for your buck in terms of greatest change at that stage.
Yeah.
A lot of the behavioral techniques that I teach, oftentimes I'm teaching them to parents to support their children. And then sometimes they're implementing for themselves or they're coming to me and like, oh, how can I use this? How can I use this to support my own symptoms? But oftentimes for professional folk or folks who are running their own businesses
Mhm.
and then they get diagnosed or they have this awareness, what's going to give them the greatest change is going to be an amphetamine.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm so glad that we're talking about all this because I think about when someone comes into my world, it's do they have a sleep disorder? What's happening with the lab? There's all these different things that are contributing. I think people think it's just what I'm eating and how I'm moving. And the
It's
reality is
not.
like, oh my gosh, like that's maybe 5%. I'm thinking here, I'm like, gosh, if I could dream up the perfect clinic, okay, it would include neuropsych testing,
Yes.
sleep study. We would just bring you in and we would assess you for a week. And I know these clinics exist, right? You hear about people going on medical tourism where they go get all the things done. I just think we would be catching so many things earlier and we would avoid so much shame. I think it would be radical how different the experience would be for people.
Yeah, and I really do think that a neuropsych assessment, regardless of what shows up, every adult I have ever assessed or has ever come to me with a report, and then I'm providing the intervention to address whatever was uncovered in the assessment. I've never had an adult come to me and not say, I'm so glad I did this. It's given me personal insight, personal awareness, regardless of what the diagnosis or diagnoses are. And it's given me clarity, right?
Yeah.
I definitely would encourage people who are struggling, who are like, my motivation isn't great, or I want to make these changes, but I'm just not able to think about that because there may be legitimate, real things, not laziness, not you're just not trying hard enough, that are going on that can be addressed and can be resolved with the right interventions and the right
Yeah.
supports.
Do you think there's anything that we didn't talk about here that's important for people to hear? Because, of course, we could talk for hours about this.
It's not a shortcoming to have difficulties with executive functioning or any kind of cognitive or emotional disorder. It's not a personal failing. It's not something you have to handle on your own. It's not something that has to get bad enough for you to deserve
Yes.
to have support
I'm so
for.
glad you bring this up. Yes.
Um, right. And that's I hear that all the time. Like, it's not that bad. I should be able to manage it on my own.
Mm.
That's our individualistic culture that we're socialized into, and we're taught that it's somehow a personal failing if we ask for help. There are supports out there at any age.
Yeah.
Earlier is always better, but it doesn't matter if you're 50. You can still benefit from knowing, and there are still interventions that might be useful. And I guess the other thing that people should know about ADHD is it really is like a lifelong
Mhm.
disorder. So challenges with executive functioning. If you have a clinical diagnosis of ADHD or you meet criteria, that means that the symptoms were present in early childhood. And when I talk about early childhood, you can give a provisional diagnosis to a child that's 3. The symptoms are there.
Yeah.
They may evolve over time, right? Because we know that the brain and our prefrontal cortex is developing until around age 24, 25.
Yeah.
So somebody with the ADHD, like the way I looked at 16 or 18 or 20 in terms of my organization was very different than the way I looked at 40, even before I was doing medication management. But the symptoms are still there. They may be less prominent, they may look different, but it's a lifelong disorder.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing that I would want people to understand. You don't just start to have symptoms of ADHD when you're 16. That's not the way it works. That is something else.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
Thank you so much for talking us through so much of this. I think people are going to have a better understanding. And honestly, one of the main things I'm leaving this conversation with you is hearing that there's a lot of hope, because I think people are, at least by the time they get to me, they're pretty desperate because no one's been telling them any of this. And so
No,
you've just kind of been on your own island thinking you're crazy. And that's just the worst feeling in the world. So I'm glad that we brought this up. I'm sure some people are going to listen and think, oh my gosh, I actually could get tested. I could get help. So along those lines, can you tell us more about how people can find you, more about your clinic, just because I know
sure.
that people are going to definitely want that help.
I run a virtual practice. My website, you can find me and contact me at saluskipsychology.com. And I know Dr. Rentia, you'll link that in the show notes. And in terms of my practice, I work with adults. So I work with people 18 and over. And my practice is really focused on helping adults who are experiencing issues like ADHD, who are struggling with boundary issues, who maybe are dealing with caregiver stress, discrimination, and then I treat depression, anxiety, what we think of as the run of the mill mental health issues or disorders that people experience. And I work collaboratively with clients. I use evidence-based treatments, which means I use treatments that have been tested and rigorously researched, but I do so from a culturally informed lens. I'm a bilingual therapist, so I provide services in Spanish and English, and my practice is a telemedicine practice. I have what's called PsyPAC licensure, which is an interjudicial compact. So I actually am licensed to provide services for people living in 43 out of our 50 states.
You never told me that. Wait a minute.
It just came through, Dr.
Okay.
Rentia.
Okay, because I'm
So-
like, you did not tell me that.
I'll send you, there's like a PsyPAC, they have their little website because I think it's easier for people just to look at it. But it's
Because we're going to list the states. Can you just, spoiler alert, can you tell me, is Indiana one of them?
Indiana is.
Okay, good. Because I'm
I'll
like,
tell you the 7 that are not included. It's Massachusetts, New York, California, New Mexico, I think Alaska, Hawaii. Yeah, I think those are the ones.
I'm really sorry, everyone listening that's in those, but the other ones, they can all benefit from you.
So I can. And I now accept Blue Shield, Blue Cross, PPO. So I can accept that insurance and then cash paying clients.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's only going to be Illinois, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Okay. This is so great. You are just an incredible clinician and person, and I'm so glad that you came on today. Thank you for giving us your time. And again, like you said, I'm going to make sure to link everything down below. This is going to be one of the best show notes to really learn a lot from someone that's been listening to this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rentia.
That marks the end of today's episode. But if you're newer to the podcast, I want to tell you about something that we have, and it's a free podcast roadmap. So this is perfect for any of you that are listening where you want to be directed to very specific episodes. So let's say that you are just starting out and you want to know, what should I do right when I start on the medications? Or you're experiencing certain side effects on the GLP-1s, or you want to know what to do if you're in a plateau, or if emotional eating is taking over, or if hunger levels are high. So we have many different categories of episodes that we've talked about, because there's a lot at this point. So if you want to be able to navigate that very easily, we have it broken down by category and also the episodes that are there, and we hyperlink to everything. So you can just click on it and find the episode, easy peasy. If you want that, you can go to rentiaclinic.com/podcast roadmap. We'll have it linked right here underneath the show notes where you're listening. And you can go ahead and get that free resource so that it makes it easy for you to navigate, because I know that it's really hard when someone has an established podcast. I am such a podcast fiend. I'm listening to podcasts all day long. And when I find one that I love, but there's a lot that are out there, I am so lost. So I hope that you enjoy this free podcast roadmap. Again, the link to get to that is going to be rentiaclinic.com/podcast roadmap. I hope this is helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.